and welcome to Artalab, South Asia's first independent visual culture podcast with me, Kamayani. Today, we have with us Sheelasha Rajbhandari and Gurung, co-curators of the 4th Kathmandu Triennale, originally slated for 2020 and currently on view at venues throughout the city of Kathmandu. Founded by the Siddhartha Art Foundation, the Triennale features over 130 artists from more than 50 countries, as well as a range of local and international research projects. Rooted in the experiences of contemporary Nepal and in conversation with its history through the venues chosen to be part of it, the Triennale's thematic interest lies in decolonizing borders of the global south, foregrounding indigenous practices, and acknowledging the coexistence of multiple worldviews within national communities. The Triennale is on till the 31st of March 2022. You can view the art and keep track of events and talks at the Triennale online on Instagram and Facebook at kathmandu.triennale. Sheelasha and Hitman, thank you so much for coming on Artalab.
Thank you for having us.
Before we continue, I'd like to let our listeners know how to access the material accompanying our conversation. To view the images and other material being referenced and discussed in the episode, click on the link in the show notes to access the guide. You can also find the link to the guide for each episode in our Instagram captions and tweets. I'll let our audiences know we're recording pretty early in the morning for me. I mean, we're on curator time, which is like the opposite of podcaster time. I think podcasters tend to come to life in the evening. I don't think I've gotten up this early just to have a conversation since like college. So one of the reasons, I was interested in talking to you guys, apart from obviously the Triennale's profile and importance in the South Asian art calendar, is because it spoke to my own mountain identity. I'm from Dehradun, which is in the Himalayas, and I'm curious about the long histories of Himalayan cosmopolitanism and political and aesthetic affinities creating this distinct cultural zone. And I know this reconceptualization of geographies is one of the motors driving the Kathmandu Triennale as well.
Yeah, so I think there's like a huge misconception and also a lot of romanticization of Himalayan areas. And I think Himalayan areas is one of the last remaining places where even from people from Asia itself sort of romanticize about.
Or mostly from the Highlands people, Highlands people will always seen as a isolated place or sacred or mystic, yeah.
But these places, if you see, even the factual histories have always been one of the most fluid places, mobile, boundaryless, transhuman, and that is something which still continues in a lot of cultures beyond the political boundaries, where now the recent construct of countries have created obstacles for these communities who are now forced to be fixated to the nation state's identity. And there are, in fact, a lot of communities around the world like this. Where if we say about from Pacific Islands to Amazon forest, where the forests have been divided into different countries. And what does it mean to have this shared identity, yet be forced to be fixated to certain to the larger nation's framework.
Right. Yeah, I think this idea of the border lands is really crucial in many ways, right? At least to the experience of peoples and communities living in these mountain regions in the Himalayan belt. I mean, I'm thinking also of something like, James Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed. I know James Scott has asterisks have to be placed in front of his name. He worked for the CIA, and his anti-state analysis has been critiqued by other Marxists as being pro free market, even if that may not necessarily have been the intention. But it was a provocative thesis that I was very impacted by when I read it for the first time at university about how peoples in our part of the world might have or might in the future resist certain kinds of domination, right? And imperialism, for example. And we'll come back to that because I think that that is a very generative conversation to have about the the role of the border in theorizing the world. But just to come back to the Triennale as well, I thought we could talk a little bit about the history of the Triennale. So this is the fourth edition, right, of the Kathmandu Triennale.
Mm, yeah, it's supposed to be like International Kathmandu Art Festival in 2009 and 2012. Then from 2000, then it's supposed to happen in 2015, but there were like massive earthquake, no, in Nepal. 2015, and then in 2017 it changed its format to Triennale, no? Then yeah, this is the second edition of Triennale format, but lineages with the fourth edition of Kathmandu International Art Festival.
How would you say that this edition continues or departs from the conversation inaugurated in 2009 at what was then the Kathmandu International Art Festival?
I mean, we there the continuation is there in many ways. For say, let's say from a very basic thing like the venues we are in, are also it started from a very feministic, where in 2009, the founder, Sangita Thapa, she was interested in the woman's role in the society. And in this edition of the Triennale that we're curating, we do talk about that a lot. In fact, the feminine and feminist angle in all of the curatorial concept is like omnipresent there.
And the second edition was about like environment, climate change, no?
Mhm.
So it's, and the third edition was curated by the Philip Ben Carter from Ghent. So it was about the artist and the relationship of artists with the city where he based or lived, no? So it's always like connected with the current reality and like the issues we facing in the present time. But in this edition, it's more like we're more focused on the process or the continuity as an artist or as a collective we've been practicing since long time. So it's this Triennale is kind of continuity of our artistic practice, or
Mhm.
like the continuity of our collective practice. So it's a bit different than the previous editions, definitely, because this time we're three artistic director Cosmin Costinas and my colleague Silas and me curating. So it's kind of collective curatorial intervention, and also we were uh, politically conscious about the selection of artists representing the different voices from different community all over the world, and also decolonizing the idea of what is art, and like how we perceive art, uh, and also this power politics, power dynamic, geopolitics,
Neocolonialism.
neocolonial, like influences, and also how we can decentralize, uh, not only, like most of the, in Nepal, most of the art activities are very much centered in Kathmandu, in the capital. So how can decentralize it geographically, and also like how we can decentralize it from the limitation of fine art, because most of these Biennale Triennales are always dominated by who came from fine art background, no?
Yeah. And that itself is a colonial construct, right? The distinction between fine arts and like lived traditions of folk art, what's called, yeah, what's kind of ossified as folk art. Um, yeah, I mean, I also think, like, for example, I thought just to set up, we could, just set up a context as well to understand some of these curatorial concerns. So I think even as a neighbor, as an Indian, I've learned more about Nepalese art in the past year, maybe, than I have ever done before. So it's a big moment for Nepali art, right? You have a pavilion at the Venice Biennale this year, which also you guys are curating, and the Nepal Art Now show opened at the Welt Museum in Vienna. The artist and art historian Len Singh Bangdale had his first major solo in New York last year. And of course, I mean that the photo Kathmandu has been around for a while, but in the wake of the 2015 earthquake that you talked about, so it seems like there's a lot happening in and around art, contemporary art in Nepal in a relatively short period of time. What do you think are the reasons for this effervescence? Like, why do you think this is the moment when Nepalese art is kind of on the world stage in this way?
I mean, I would not see this in that way, because from my perspective, who's living here, and as a practicing artist, the art was always thriving, and I would not compare the art which is thriving to just getting international platform, and that is not the way to equivalent the value. If you see in the 50s, late 60s, like artists were traveling around, like exhibiting in Paris. Artists like Urmila Upadhyaya is exhibiting at Paris,
Laswan Shrestha.
Lakshman Shrestha, Laing Singh Bangdale. And if you say like Lakshman Shrestha also has such a huge contribution in the abstract art movement in the India itself, which is not very much acknowledged and talked about. I think what is lacking is the acknowledgement, which like is due. If you see the movements like in later 90s and early 2000s, Nepal was part of the Triangle Network.
Yeah, like codes in India, and like Brito in Bangladesh, Basil
Mhm.
and Tirtha in Sri Lanka. So they were part of the same network, and lots of internal and international workshops, exhibitions, accents, residency was taking place, and
And
lots of accents was happening.
happening, yeah. And even, I mean, recently, if you see, like the local art scene is really like dynamic. There are a lot of artist-led initiatives, artist collectives, and really passionately working, like opening a small gallery, doing workshops, residencies, etc. And very diverse, I have to say. So,
But yeah, definitely, like
Hmm.
the population is like less comparatively with India or Bangladesh or Pakistan or in the region, and also the like the economy and the politics, the support structure, the network. It's
Hmm.
definitely play the role on, like like visibility of artists or the art community, which are definitely lacking here. Like we don't have like very strong support system from government or like corporates or like international networks. That's why Nepal is not that much in the international or global discourse, art discourse. But I agree with Silasa, like internally there are so many happening.
Right, and I think that maybe the Triennale is an opportunity to for that kind of platform, like for the population and communities within Nepal as well, not just geared or oriented towards a kind of international gaze, right? I mean, that's one of the discontents that we have to deal with, right? As members of the so-called global south. I mean, I'm listening to you talk. I was also thinking that, like, India, for all its supposed infrastructural configuration, is sort of, we didn't have a biennale till 2012, right, when the Kochi Biennale started. And because we understand that these are, of course, market-driven currents as well. In the Indian art scene exploded, let's say, in the 2000s, which is relatively late, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of when you consider how long modern art in India has existed, right? So I think these issues of lack of resources and support structures are kind of span the subcontinent, and they are a challenge for all of us living in the region. And I think also, speaking to what you guys discussed in terms of like networks within the within South Asia as well. I mean, I think that is the impetus that also allows for those kind of cross-border collaborations to happen, because we recognize that in terms of our national systems, that sort of support doesn't exist. So then you have a lot of artist driven, or community driven, or even privately funded organizational apparatuses set up, right, to make up for that lag. um, and sort of coming back to this idea of decolonization that you guys flagged earlier. I mean, the title of this edition is 2077, right? So it's the Bikram Sambat equivalent of 2020. And there's a suggestion of timekeeping outside the dominant global standard. Now, how we measure time is, of course, it forms a basis for how we develop a theory of the world or the universe. So, how does this marking of time, in a way, counter to the Eurocentric on global North paradigm, open up the Triennale's curatorial concerns, with relation to decolonization and indigeneity?
Yeah, it was so the decision of like shifting the title. I mean, it is not even a title, it's an experience, we have to say. But like initially we would call ourselves 20 Kathmandu Triennale 2020, which was supposed to happen in 2020 if there was no pandemic. So decision of shifting from Gregorian calendar to 2077 Bikram Sambat was during the pandemic itself, where we were kind of really in the time of rethinking many things, uh, and also the fact that it became such a bad omen to like 2020 itself, to really wanted to shift away from it in a lighter note, but also very conscious effort to acknowledge the calendar system, uh, 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 which is officially recognized here in Nepal. Also, simultaneously acknowledging that Nepal has multiple time counting system. We have multiple New Years and multiple holidays for the New Years. It's one of the fun fact over here. Um, Also, but the idea of time itself, like how 2077 is like 50 years away in understanding that, and it kind of reflected how we are looking in time conceptually and curatorially in Triennale itself, with a non-linear way, acknowledging past, present, while also imagining future. So futurism is something we like are seriously sort of considering and inviting artists who are working in that area.
Hmm. Right, and coming to the artists themselves, so I mean, I think that the programming, based on what I've been able to access online as well, the programming seems to be quite diverse, and there's a mix of like big names and fresh voices. Um, can you speak a bit about the process of deciding on these artists? Like, what were the criteria for selection? And so, yeah, do you want to just talk about how you arrived at this selection?
So yeah, the selection process was like very, like sensitively we've been like we thought. Silasami and Cosmin, like we were not looking the artists who have big name, or like we have a big value in the commercial market, or represented by this multi international big galleries, so we were looking for more like the artists who have this meaningful contribution that's fit in our curatorial concept. And also it's like continuing our relationship with lots of artists, activists, or different community members, like contributing in artistic vocabulary in different way to continue that relationship. And also uh, having this global solidarity and network with the different issues we've been like seriously involved, or which we like appreciate, or which we feel it has been marginalized since long time because of different reason, no? So that's why. And also like how can we balance the geopolitics and also the genders and the diversity, so we have like now artists from like Pacific, from Aboriginal community from Australia to New Zealand, then Sami community from like Europe, and also like Namazu community from US, and we have a
Yeah, no, no.
Anonymous artists from like Amazon. So it's like diverse representations.
But within Nepal also we researched a lot. So this is in fact is a triennale is one part of our ongoing process, which didn't started in Triennale and will continue after it. Also, it's a continuation of our relationship with people from more than a decade. Some of them, but also some of them through the process we met for the first time and built relationship again. uh, Within Nepal also we traveled a lot in different regions of Nepal, and Nepal is such a geographically diverse country. We have like very diverse multiple indigenous community and ethnicities, languages itself.
More
So
than 125 languages.
Mhm.
five language group, even India doesn't have it. So, and the whole process itself was also something very important for us. And communication with
Mhm.
artists was another challenge. uh,
Yeah, it's like some of many of them even don't use like emails, or like it's very
Right.
difficult to communicate them through the phone, mobile phone. They don't carry mobile. So we have
Right.
through their family, their son, daughters to connect them. So
Right.
they don't understand the art language we use. Like mostly
Hmm.
uh, in contemporary art. So it's like a alien thing for them.
Also, like some of the artists are like studied fine arts but also are practicing shamans, and
Hmm.
um, and then like how to present the work. We had a lot of communication with the artists, but not just limited to like them. We went through the umbrella organization, like shamans or umbrella organization.
Oh wait, they have an umbrella organization?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Crazy.
so in fact, like one of our like a very important section is about that, and the umbrella organization Tamu Pelusang. So representation represented from the organization is going to talk about why did they felt the necessity from being a bone practitioner, which is very animistic, to
and
forming
naturalistic.
and very nature based, to forming an like organization nationwide, but also like they have, I think, around 20 branches all around the world.
Wait, they're like franchised. What is this? I didn't know any of this. I mean, it's fascinating. Like someone like alert the ghost of Carlos Castaneda. Uh, but yeah, I feel like this is really fascinating also because like you guys talked about some of the challenges unique to the Triennale that you curated. Kind of really indicate the what's really at stake, or what the work that's really involved in trying to decolonize, not just as a conceptual paradigm, but the logistical and like physical work, of making that happen. For example, by way of including all of these different artists who don't conform to or don't necessarily relate to the model of contemporary art that still remains is still sort of based in the power centers in the global north or in the Euro North American context, right? So these are very real challenges that you guys talked about in terms of even involving artists from communities that have historically maybe not had the capital also to participate on their terms in this discourse. um, it's not just decolonization as we understand in terms of global of a global phenomenon, but also that which happen colonization is something that happens locally, right? By systems or mechanisms within societies and what are delineated as nations. I mean, of course, in India as well, this is a massive challenge as well, because I mean, all of these communities are also people with the, in a sense, the first moral claim to all of the lands and all of the resources, right, that are exploited and plundered and kind of appropriated by nations. Um, so I'm also curious to know, like, how do you how do you even convince people, like you said, you these people, a lot of the artists from these communities wouldn't even have like modes of communication that we take for granted. So how do you begin to have that conversation, and like, because it's also a question of trust, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
why would anybody trust someone from a world that they don't necessarily understand? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, I think this is again comes didn't just happen overnight for Triennale. It's something we have been doing as an artist, individually and through our collective at Nepal from a long, long, long time. And also the communities are who we ourselves and our collective belong to. So we're not talking about somebody else, but ourselves. The artists who are part of the Triennale are also talking about mostly their own communities and their own situation. And this is something we really wanted to focus this time because, like, throughout the history, their voices had been erased, strategically marginalized, and somebody else just felt fine to talk on behalf of them and represent like them. But like, can we just share their voice directly, like for once? And
Yeah, if we look on like all the scholarships or research paper or the books published, like the conversation we have in the public domains, then it's always by the foreigners, no, like the European or American scholars or academics. So the one of the main focus in Triennale was bringing this first person narrative. So it's like a direct giving the platform to them.
also, yeah, while we are talking about yes, decolonization, it's really important to reflect on the structure of our own community, especially in our region where casteism has been there for thousands of years, like not even 100. If we compare it, like the European colonization is just like few hundred years, no?
Yeah.
and then the casteism have been ingrained in us, but it's important to reflect on that structure. Let's reflect on like how our system values artistic labors are like,
Yeah.
yeah, they are like
They were, yeah,
segregated as Dalits
on
are
past.
Mm.
and then also like indigenous communities, the Adivasis, who have these different genealogies, are also again marginalized. In Nepal, we had a civil code where many indigenous communities were segregated as Masinya Matwali, which translates into enslavable alcohol drinkers. And if we see like these communities till this date are still have very difficult position in society, while the upper caste people still have the privilege, the wealth, the education, and access to many things. How many Dalit artists do you know in India and Nepal as well? Who are radically reclaiming, who have like certain position, like and look at all the big name artists, like what caste they belong to. Like there are margins within the margins, and there are like dynamics of gender, and then like other like non-binary folks who like again are in the bottom of the bottom. And we have invited like activists and artists who vocally talk about that,
Or fighting
are
from
still
long
fighting
time.
for that from a long time. And it's something like it's so layered, and therefore to have that, to talk about plurality and multiplicity is extremely important, more than ever before.
Right. I mean, because India and Nepal are both Hindu dominant societies, I was also wondering about that sort of aspect of any kind of artistic endeavor, right? At least in India and Nepal, for example. And so I think like this aspect is something that I was also interested in, right? Because we come from societies that are inherently Brahmanical, and to then kind of interrogate this idea of decolonization becomes more complex, right? Because in our context, like the upper castes always aligned with the colonizing forces. I mean, obviously they enacted their own brand of oppression, but even through the colonial process, they were part of the machine, complicit with the machinery that dominated. So I think that that it's really interesting to hear you talk also about this in terms of not just indigeneity, but very specifically in terms of the Hindu caste system, the Varn system. But coming back to the artworks themselves, I think one of the things that I was also curious about was, since we were talking about history, there's a range of sites that make up the Triennale, right? From the medieval to like mid 20th century ones. So I was curious to know, how did contemporary concerns, reanimate these historical places? And also, it'd be great to hear from you about like maybe a specific work installed in each of the sites that really captured its feel for you as curators.
Hmm. So, yeah, for curatorially, like for us, those venues were not just for space, for like exhibition making, or having exhibition there, but it's more like how those venues connect historically with our curatorial concept, no? Like what's the historical background all those venues have. Like when we talk about Patan Museum, then it was the Molla Palace from 14th century to 18th century, So, and it has went through lots of changes, political and like social changes within the time. So some of the, like in Sundari Chowk, one of the block in Patan Museum we've been using, uh, had this. It was a prison till 1990s. Like, and there is like a room for high priest, and there is like like different historical background, no? So, and also if we look all these national institutions and the museums in Kathmandu, most of their collections are mostly from artifacts or objects from the valley, only from the valley, from the certain community. So we strategically use those space and bring very diverse artists from all over the world, and also like different lineages of artistic vocabularies, like from Pawa painting to ink painting of East Asia, and like the art practices that have a relationship with healings, and like different spiritual and sacred practices, and also like iconography, uh, and uh, uh, like different the significances uh, these practice have in this different society or different community. So it's like a bringing all this different diversity together, uh, and open the limitation of how we see art, or how we like categorize art uh, according to this uh, colonial narratives, like what is high art and what is the low art, like how they've been they segregated different local art practices into handicraft, or only like they were only acknowledged as a skillful
Hmm.
language,
Like folk art and that sort of thing. Yeah.
tribal art.
A very ethnographic kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, categorization.
So they were never looked as a very kind of like intellectual
Hmm.
contribution in the community and the society, or the development of
Right.
this artistic language, no?
Right.
Yeah, so each venue actually, we tap into the venue's own history, and connect it curatorially. So that's like Patton Museum, and then Bahadur Shah Baitak, Nepal Art Council, Siddhartha Art Gallery, and Tarragong Museum, and the Nepal Art Council, for example, is located next to a very politically charged street where people come and demonstrate and voice their opinion from all around the country. The council was also founded by Loin Singh Wangtel, the pioneer artist, and then there we have placed works which are very politically charged, and where artists and activists are trying to reclaim their voices, and demand accountability for say, um, and Tarragone Museum. It was built in as a modernist fantasy by an architect, Carl Pusco. Then we have strategically placed there. We enter the venue by through a mural made by a group of
Hmm.
Mithila artists, and so it was a very conscious intervention to place the Mithila mural on the modernist architecture. But the whole entire area still has a lot of forest and around 20 jackals, etc.
Yeah, like like when like Tarragong, so most of the like the artists or participants are bringing this how human has been manipulating the nature, like
Hmm.
since the since the beginning of human civilization, and later how this during the colonial time, how like lots of these resources were extracted, and all this how the seed politics started, and
Hmm.
so like a botanic garden, like how it
Yeah.
became an influential model of garden all over the world during the colonial time,
Hmm.
and like a Persian garden or Jain garden.
Yeah.
So later, uh, in present day, like how these corporates were extracting the resources from different
Mm.
part of the world, and how it's affecting the ecosystem or our like environment and many things, no, and also like in the present day, like how lots of these farming lands are turning into like concrete forest, like how because of the urbanizations, how it's been affected, so
Yeah.
and in Bahadur Shah, it's like the Bahadur Shah is very interesting space. It was built by Bahadur Shah, son of Prithviraj Shah, who expanded this Gorkha region and conquered like Kathmandu and
Mm.
other part of Nepal. So that building was used for to strategize to continue the expansion project of his father, and it was also like arsenal back
Mm.
then, and so that's why we brought the, like deconstructing how we see the mapping, like, or deconstructing the idea of mapping,
Mm.
of like indigenous technology of navigation, viewing cosmology, mapping the cosmology, and talking about what is center and what is periphery, like, and the issue of border and cross border.
Mm.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, but it's also interconnected, right? Like the moment you actually start unpacking I mean, we tend to sometimes use these words almost as if they're operating autonomously, but obviously, like they have their inherent, like linked logic. Like when we talk about colonialism, it's obviously not just of the peoples, but it's also of the natural resources and the strategies of, exploiting those that are part of the machinery. And like through the garden or through the map, you're able to access a kind of worlding that happens
hmm,
across different communities. Like what is cosmology, right? Cosmology in
Yeah.
an anthropological sense is basically developing an account of the world, right?
yeah,
uh, or an account of the universe. I mean, in most, like, which is closer to its scientific meaning, but essentially it means like a society developing a way to make sense of the world. And so, like, there are all of these different ways, and this pluralism is a big part of societies like ours, right? Because, like you said, you already live with so many languages, so many different kinds of worldviews, and to kind of have invite them into this space does something to its history, right?
yeah,
And it's because there's a history that's already established, but by intervening in it in this way, you're also troubling it, and you're kind of questioning it, or you're making a critical point there. um but also I think it's interesting because we've talked about like Nepal itself and maybe the region around it, but you've also talked about how, like, you have artists from all over the world that are part of the program. And to me that's also interesting, like how formats like this allow for these kinds of arguments to be made about different kinds of affinities and uh, different kinds of associations, that exceed the frameworks that we were talking about earlier, of the nation or even of the region and that sort of thing. But so how did you come across like these international artists that you decided to include? Was there like an open call, or did you seek out these artists? What was your approach?
I mean, we have also met up in different time this artist in person when we were traveling for our own like artist residency or exhibition, etc. And also, of course, there's Cosmin who's worked with different artists, uh, and we wanted to create, like really weave the stories and weave the concepts rather than place different people of different contexts in a different way or give different pedestal. So when we're talking about this different cosmologies, when we open up, like there's a larger discussions and larger sort of unacknowledged cosmologies and genealogies, and it's really important to acknowledge this multiplicity in a way that also kind of includes different stories of different parts of the world. So that was the thing when we were talking, when we were thinking. So when we were thinking about the cartography and mapping and navigation, so it was important for us to also acknowledge where we're talking about the universe, mapping the universe. It was really important for us to let's say reflect on the traditions which was almost endangered in the Pacific Islands, the history of stick mapping, and like Daniel Boyd was one of the artists who was reflecting on that. And we also met him and went to visit his studio in Sydney when we were there. um, and so it was a process, and a lot of artists went where we approached because of the COVID and the timing. Didn't we couldn't like make out, couldn't include them, even though their voices were very important. Um,
Many artists, yeah, we have to withdraw because of
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because the pandemic seems to have had an adverse impact on almost all international, um, yeah, events. So,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, and also, I mean, the curatorial concept is led by three of us, Cosmin. So he has his own relationship, and he has his own research while he was traveling. So we weaved all those together, and pandemic in a way also with like all the depression and anxieties within us in the team also in fact gave us the time to build the relationship within the team and time to think and really like quiet and silent and reflect for a while. And it gave and it like so initially when we started in the early of 2019 and after pandemic we kind of sort of improvise and rethought and rebuild accordingly, and reached out artists accordingly. And again, artists like Anna Mendieti, who's historically such an important figure, and like artists like Ima Kunz, for example. So we were also conscious of the fact about to have this very, really powerful figure who, in their own times, were not like
not appreciated or acknowledged. Yeah.
because they were woman or because they're for Imakun's her practice didn't came from fine art, fine quote unquote fine art background. But later on, there has been at least a small but strong movement to research on them, to bring their discussion in a larger platform, to question why are great artists only like white straight men. That
yeah,
is our solidarity.
that's the template.
Yeah, and then which
Yeah,
reflects and echoes to our own system which we just talked about, like, and then to have that discussion over here and multiple parts of the world was very important. It was a process, I have to say. It was a long process.
yeah, yeah. And how did you learn to pronounce everyone's names? Because I think that is the question on my mind.
Use different way, no? Like sometimes we ask artists to send the voice recording, no,
Oh,
their
wow.
name.
Right. The voice recording is interesting because I also think it's like an index, right, of all the things that we've been talking about in terms of the challenges one faces living in a multilingual, multicultural context. I mean, in this case, internationally, of course, as well. Like, and so the way in which we pronounce each other's name becomes kind of key almost. Um, but on that note, I also wanted to ask you, one of the things that I find important to address is the sponsorship of global displays of art by a mix of public and private entities, right? Like governments and institutions that in many ways replicate the very structures of political and economic oppression that we have been critiquing throughout and which you critique through the Triennale. So, for example, even the Kathmandu Triennale, there was the involvement of the World Bank, of the United States Embassy, the government of Nepal, and governments, as we know themselves, are they're fraught entities. So how would you respond to that, and how do you see that problem as curators?
Yeah, I mean, it's from the very beginning itself. That was something which we were very critical about, and we were like, we wanted to make sure that if obviously there was going to be a lot of negotiation, and especially if there's a larger scale event where you also want to not just give people like, we don't want to use term like give platform. It's just, it's not fair. You have to respect the labor, but also at least like pay, like have like pay, not just give, like use free labors, like have good salaries to people, at least if it's small amount. Also we have artist fee,
Okay.
etc. And then like how to balance that also was a challenge. And then
I feel like the shaman unions convinced you to do this. Collective bargaining. Sorry, yeah, go on. No, it's just I'm saying this because as we know, right? Like I think you in general the culture industry is so terrible when it comes to paying people anything.
Yeah, and
but
also
also
like when this font politics is always, like it's always not in favor, no? Like it's always come with different negotiation, and like. But we were so conscious about, we were very conscious about the censorship, like because when there
Mm.
is a fund, there is also different kind of negotiation and the pressure. So we make sure to our donor like to keep us very independent.
so while we
Mm.
were, so it we did it in the MOU itself, that we are going, and that they cannot interfere in any way the
Mm.
thing we are doing, despite the fact that it might be critical of themselves. So with the World Bank we signed the contract, but we also
Mm.
didn't take a lot of funds actually in the beginning, which was a great and it was disadvantage in the beginning, because we didn't had a lot of funds when we started. We didn't had funds when we started in 2019. It was
Mm.
me, Hitman, and then Apurva and
Sarare.
Sharare who's doing that. And then we, beyond the curator thing also, some you don't have that luxury, right? To be a curator, so
Yeah.
doing a lot of many things, including like building the team and collect like fundraising, etc. And we actually didn't take a huge amount of fund, which was very crucial in the beginning. And yeah, like we had that well, because it was
Yeah.
confusing, yeah. And we
Yeah.
still are paying its consequences in many ways, but yeah.
So much of what we're critical about is this kind of total ownership of the commons by corporations and by um, these structures of neo-imperialist governance, and that usually happens through finance capitalism these days,
Hmm.
as much as it does through obviously through political means. But I mean, the fact that our public spaces, our public sphere, or our commons are completely, um, in a way, controlled by these infrastructures, that is concerning.
Uh, it's also like the continuity of the partnership also, like lots of the like uh, institutions or the partner institutions, they
Mm,
have this edition where somewhere like continuity of our previous edition, like they were all
yeah,
supporting us. And
right.
also because we don't have a lots of internal support system, so we were
Mm,
looking to like international cultural or
yeah.
uh, institutions, those who are already
Mm,
involved uh,
yeah.
art field in the region, like like if you see the list of our supporter international institution partner,
Yeah.
then they're
Yeah.
all over, like in Kochi or Dhaka Art Summit, or so it's a same support system. we've been part of, like we've been collaborating with, or we've been partners.
Yeah.
But there are also
Right.
many mm, uh, like uh, program we did to raise funds, like in Hong Kong, or uh,
Yeah, so there are a lot of
Yeah.
like independent art
individuals,
individual
individuals who like
who supported,
Mm.
which was
Right.
very yeah, yeah, it was helpful.
Yeah.
because it's not possible to without this support or this partnership, it's not possible to conduct
Yeah.
something like this large scale events, not only in
It isn't.
all
Yeah.
over the world. It's difficult.
I've
Um.
worked in different models, like when we have done like initially, not Triennale, our different curatorial project where we got support from the community itself, like entirely.
Hmm.
The entire project, which was 6 month long, community members supported it in a different way, by actually giving like a cash or supporting our launch or volunteering or giving us equipment or giving us space to stay, or
Hmm.
materials. So, I mean, we have worked in a different models as well, but it was
Yeah.
smaller scale.
But yeah,
Yeah.
Triennale is a different, like it's required
Yeah.
lots of like this what we say, this international standard of security of artworks,
Hmm.
insurance values, and also like the infrastructure needed for like for like artists like Ima Kun, Sung Fai, and different artists. Like we have to build certain kind of infrastructure.
Right. Right. That's yeah. I think that it's the issue of scaling up, a in terms of quantum, and then of course, like you said, in terms of the kinds of artworks that you're, that are part of the Triennale.
Yeah,
Also, how to value like people's labor and not not just depend on free laborers all the time. Actually,
Oh yeah, that
yeah, like they get
100%.
paid well properly. Yeah.
and also because of
Yeah.
this sensitivity of the material itself. Like we have lots of works, textile works, which need
Hmm.
care, and we have like different medium and materials. We need a specific care, so it's somehow come up with a lot of
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Did you face any issues or run into any trouble with the Nepal government itself, or were they
No,
okay
no,
with you guys doing whatever you want?
no. This time it's like it's the first time Nepal government is like partner, like come in the board as a partner
Mm-hmm.
institutions. So we hope it will continue, and
Yeah.
we'll have a needed support from the government in the coming editions of in future.
Yeah, and other like cultural thing, or like they should be supporting the arts, not just, you know what they do, like they promote in a like touristic way, and then they use this in a tokenistic way, but don't actually invest in its
Hmm.
preservation, and just and then, just use it, extract it, and it's something we should also question them, and they should be investing
Yeah.
in the preservation of the arts, and not just Triennale. They should do more, many things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because actually, in a way, I mean, one is the state is a complicated entity, but at the same time, it's kind of the one legitimate channel you have to get the citizen funded projects off the ground. Like in the sense that it's tax funded, right? The support that comes from the government, so there is a kind of accountability and transparency built into it, and you're like responsive to the communities and to the citizens. You're also less dependent than on all of these other private actors, that, and there's less pressure to compromise on anything, because then you're using money that is in a way that is coming from the people, or the kind of conversations it's possible to have, critical
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah, there should be
Yeah,
focus the discussion, and if we are critiquing them, also they should be listening, because they should be responsible of listening to like what people are not happy about, or what kind of policy
yeah,
changes should be done. Because the kind of power, obviously, which government has, none of the private entity can replace it, and especially in the cases of changes in policies, etc. So they should not be as traditionally they are a static entity, but then really partnering and understanding the very changes and dynamics of the society.
Yeah, like they have to change their, like looking on art, like their understanding of art is still very this colonial, like which was
yeah,
established by this East India Company in India, and we adopted that, So it's still like that. So they have to uh, understand the current language of art discourse, uh, and also look it in a very political way, like like how we representing our art or cultural practices, like Silas said, not
yeah,
just to for entertainment, or not just to showcase or entertain some VIP, when the VIP
yeah,
visit Nepal. So, what's its a beneficiary to the community, those who've been holding or continuing this since hundreds of years, and how we acknowledge their labors and the practices or intellectuality, so they have certain kind of respect and acknowledgement from the state, so yeah, maybe, and also they have to understand the language of, or the model of collaboration, like how this
mm,
collaborations works internationally or all over the world, how the different cross-disciplinary institutions collaborate with each other to make a larger impact,
right. And just sort of come back full circle, we opened the conversation with this discussion with, like, we recognize that there's voltage along this circuit of global, national, regional, and local. How would you place the Kathmandu Triennale alongside other South Asian periodic exhibitions like, the Kochi Biennale, the Dhaka Art Summit, Colombo Scope, and the Lahore Biennale, for example? What do you make of this constellation of endeavors within the subcontinent, and how do you think they kind of operate together to create the regional as a cultural sphere?
You know what's interesting? The like how our like regional biennales and triennales are so dynamic.
lots of things happening in our region, which is really great,
In recent times, of course,
Yeah.
and it's very. We had conversations initially with Kochi to collaborate, but because of COVID, we couldn't continue. Uh, but yeah, now, like, because it takes time for each institution to establish themselves also, and which is
Yeah.
very understandable with every sort of challenges. And I think what we are now moving towards very organically is also now interregional exchanges in coming years, but and yeah, very much looking forward to
Yeah, most of us are like very new, like we are still
Mm,
new in comparison to like Benale of Sydney or Venice Benale. It's like we have
yeah.
hundreds of like
Yeah.
decades of history. So, and it's also, I think,
Yeah.
not about the competitions, like which Triennale or Biennale are the best, because we all know the reality how we've been working, and like how
Mm,
hard we are working to make our region more, like dynamic, and more
yeah.
like the space environment, safe environment for the art community, from all over the world.
Yeah.
and how we opening the doors for exchange and collaborations with the globe. No, so I think, but
Yeah.
what we always uh, want is like we need more exchange and collaborations within the region, and we have to like collaborate, and we have to work together, institutional,
Yeah.
individually, personally, like in a different way as possible.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you have conversations with curators of these other events as well, right? I mean, or like I imagine that there is a kind of information or knowledge exchange that everybody in this space is trying to like to make art in our subcontinent thrive, right?
And we are doing
Yeah.
it, yeah, collectively, not from our own places, and it's happening. It's great. It's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. Maybe you guys should get on a WhatsApp group, like all the curators ever of all the biennales and triennales in South Asia, just like sending each other good morning messages.
and also artist, like
Also artists, yeah.
we can.
Although the Shaman Union guys are the ones I'm really obsessed with now. I'm going to like look all of them. But
Have
yeah, I think
actually the
yeah. Yeah, but thank you so much for joining Artalab. I really appreciate you giving us your time. I know that you have a very hectic schedule for as long as the Triennale is up, and also despite the fact that you were both under the weather. So I really value the fact that you came on Artalab to talk to us.
very much for the
Thank you.
invitation. We really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Artalab with Sheelasha Rajbhandari and Hitman Gurung as we discuss the Kathmandu Triennale 2022 that they co-curated with Cosmin Costinas. The Triennale is on till the 31st of March. You can view the art and keep track of events and talks at the Triennale online on Instagram and Facebook at kathmandu.triennale. If you enjoyed Artalab, please like and share the episode over social media. For more information and updates, you can follow us on Instagram at art.alap and on Twitter at RTALAAP.